Those stone cathedrals are holding a mathematical secret. For centuries, we have admired their beauty, but we have missed their true language. This video will permanently change how you see every medieval arch and vault, revealing the precise calculations that made them possible. We are going to decode the hidden blueprints of sacred geometry, from the mystical golden ratio to the harmonic principles of frozen music, all embedded in the stone by master builders who saw numbers as divine truth. By the end, you will understand how these ancient structures achieved impossible stability and soul-stirring beauty through a forgotten science. How did builders without modern tools execute such complex equations? And why do these proportions still feel instinctively perfect to us today? What does it mean to build a prayer out of pure mathematics? To the medieval mind, the cosmos was not a random collection of stars and planets. It was a magnificent, intelligible book, and its primary language was not Latin or Greek, but mathematics. This was the unshakable belief of scholars, monks, and master builders alike. They saw in geometry a direct reflection of the divine mind, a set of perfect, eternal forms that underpinned all of creation. This wasn't just a nice idea, it was the fundamental operating system of their reality. Thinkers like Augustine of Hippo argued that numbers were the thoughts of God, and to study geometry was to trace the very architecture of the universe. This philosophy, deeply influenced by ancient Platonic thought, held that the messy, imperfect world we see is merely a shadow of a perfect, mathematical realm of ideals. A circle drawn in the dirt is flawed, but the concept of a circle with all points equidistant from a center is eternal and divine. This world you created a powerful imperative. If you wanted to build a house for God, a cathedral, you would naturally turn to this divine language. You would use the shapes and ratios that mirrored cosmic order, believing that by doing so, you were constructing a bridge. Your stone and mortar would become a literal conduit between the earthly and the heavenly, a physical prayer built from pure geometry. This is the essence of what we call sacred geometry. It wasn't an artistic style or a secret code for initiates. It was a practical theology for builders. A mason with his compass and square wasn't just measuring. He was participating in the act of creation itself, aligning his work with the harmonic principles he believed governed everything from the orbits of planets to the growth of a seashell. This foundational belief explains why the mathematics in these structures is so deliberate, so meticulous. They weren't hiding advanced calculations because they were secretive. They were embedding them because they were sacred. The blueprint for a vault wasn't merely an engineering diagram. It was a theological statement written in stone. With this understanding, we can finally begin to read that hidden text, starting with the most famous and elusive proportional system of all, a ratio said to be written into the very fabric of life and beauty. That divine language of geometry had a signature. It was a single, perfect proportion, a ratio so persistent in nature and art that it seemed to whisper of a universal blueprint. This is the golden ratio. Mathematicians know it by the Greek letter phi, a number roughly equal to 1.618. Its magic lies in a unique and elegant relationship. Imagine a line divided into two unequal parts. The golden ratio occurs when the ratio of the entire line to the longer segment is exactly the same as the ratio of that longer segment to the shorter one. This self-similar harmony, where the parts reflect the whole, captivated thinkers from Euclid in ancient Greece to Leonardo da Vinci in the Renaissance. To the medieval master mason, however, phi was far more than a curious number. It was a direct echo of the cosmic order they sought to replicate. They believed this proportion was embedded by the Creator in the spirals of seashells, the arrangement of sunflower seeds, and the branching of trees. Therefore, to weave it into the fabric of a cathedral was to align human creation with the deepest patterns of nature itself, to build with a beauty that felt instinctively true. We can see this silent mathematics at work in the very bones of great structures. Take the floor plan of Chartres Cathedral. Scholars analyzing its dimensions find that the ratio of the nave's length to its width often approximates phi. The spacing of massive columns, the rise of arches, even the layout of cloisters in monastic complexes, all frequently adhere to this divine proportion. The builders did not achieve this by accident. Using their compasses and ropes, they could construct phi geometrically without ever calculating a decimal. They would create what's known as a golden rectangle, a shape whose side lengths are in this perfect ratio, and use it as a foundational template. This practice transformed the building site into a kind of sacred geometry workshop. The result was an environment that feels inexplicably balanced and serene. When you stand in such a space, you are not just surrounded by stone. You are standing inside a mathematical prayer, your senses responding to a harmony written into the architecture long before you arrived. The golden ratio was the first principle, a master key to aesthetic and spiritual resonance. But to translate this two-dimensional harmony into the soaring, three-dimensional majesty of a vaulted ceiling, the builders needed another, more dynamic system of proportion. Yet the blueprint for cosmic harmony was not only drawn with a compass, it was also heard with the ear. For the master builders of the Middle Ages, the most profound confirmation of their mathematical world, you came not from geometry alone, but from music. They inherited a stunning idea from the ancient Greek philosopher Pythagoras, who discovered that the most pleasing musical intervals, the perfect fifth and the resonant octave, were produced by simple, whole number ratios in the length of a vibrating string. Pluck a string, then pluck another exactly half its length, and you hear an octave, a ratio of 1 to 2. A ratio of 2 to 3 gives you a fifth, 3 to 4 gives a fourth. To Pythagoras and his medieval followers, this was not mere acoustics. It was a revelation. If simple numbers created harmony in sound, then these same ratios must be the hidden framework for all harmony in the universe, from the motion of the planets to the very structure of the soul. This concept, known as the harmony of the spheres, transformed the builder's workshop. Before setting the first foundation stone, a master might consult a monochord, a single-stringed instrument, using it not to compose a melody, but to calculate a proportion. He sought to translate audible perfection into visible, tangible form. So, the serene space of a cathedral's nave might have its width to its length in the ratio of 2 to 3, the perfect fifth. The height of a central tower might relate to the width of its base in the ratio of 1 to 2, the profound octave. These were not arbitrary aesthetic choices. They were deliberate attempts to build frozen music. Every arch, every bay, every soaring vertical line was designed to resonate with the same mathematical purity as a chord struck on a heavenly instrument. Walking through such a space was meant to be a physical and spiritual experience of cosmic consonance. Your eyes followed ratios that your ears would recognize as harmony, even in the silence. The architecture itself became a continuous, silent hymn, its stones ordered by the same simple numbers that ordered the cosmos. This pursuit of harmonic proportion solved a profound practical challenge as well. How do you design a building of immense complexity with dozens of masons working on different parts and ensure it all comes together in perfect, stable unity? The answer lay in a system that was both beautifully simple and infinitely adaptable, a modular language of stone. But how do you translate a musical chord into the skeleton of a stone vault? The master builders possessed a third, profoundly practical principle, a toolkit of shapes that allowed their designs to grow organically, like branches from a tree. This was the geometry of root rectangles. while the golden ratio gave them a perfect proportion and musical harmonies gave them a spiritual goal, root rectangles provided the versatile, living framework to build it all. These shapes with names like root 2, root 3, and root 5 are derived from a beautifully simple act. Take a perfect square, draw a line from one corner to the opposite corner, its diagonal. Now swing that diagonal line down to become the new long side of a rectangle. The shape you have just created is a root 2 rectangle. Its sides are in a ratio of 1 to the square root of 2, roughly 1 to 1.414. This might sound abstract, but its property is pure architectural genius. If you divide a root 2 rectangle in half along its long side, you create two smaller, perfect root 2 rectangles. Divide those again and you get 4 more. This is a self-generating modular system. Imagine a master mason planning the ribbed vaults of a cathedral ceiling. He could start with a large root 2 rectangle defining the main bay. By dividing it again and again using this inherent property, he could lay out the entire network of smaller vaults, ribs, and panels, all perfectly proportional to each other and to the whole. Every piece, no matter how small, belonged to the same geometric family. This ensured visual harmony and, critically, distributed weight and stress in a predictable, manageable way. The same principle applied to the dynamic silhouette of a flying buttress. Its sweeping curve and strategic placement often followed the proportions of a root 3 or root 5 rectangle, shapes derived from the diagonals of more complex polygons. These irrational numbers, which cannot be expressed as a simple fraction, were not yet understood algebraically, but the builders knew them intimately through the physical act of swinging a compass and measuring a rope. They were working with the raw, unstated mathematics of space itself. This toolkit of root rectangles allowed for endless variation without chaos. It meant a cathedral could expand over centuries, with new chapels and transepts added by different generations of masons, yet still feel like a single, coherent organism. The structure grew not by arbitrary addition, but by geometric division, a stone echo of natural growth patterns. This was the quiet, brilliant fusion of the ideal and the practical. They were building cosmic harmony, one modular, perfectly proportioned stone at a time. Yet, to execute these invisible blueprints across a vast construction site, they needed one final, ingenious innovation, a method so effective it remains a cornerstone of design to this day. The abstract elegance of root rectangles and harmonic ratios had to survive contact with reality, with wind and rain and gravity. On the construction site, the master mason's genius was not in solving equations on parchment, but in translating them directly into stone using a toolkit of breathtaking simplicity. His primary instruments were the compass, the straightedge, and a simple length of knotted cord. With these, he could conjure any shape, any angle, any proportion required by the sacred geometry of his design. The process began not on the ground, but often on a smooth, plaster-covered floor inside a lodge, a protected workshop. Here, the master would draw the full-scale blueprint of a complex architectural element, like a window tracery or a vault rib. This drawing surface was known as the tracing floor. It was the medieval equivalent of a computer-aided design screen, a one-to-one map where every curve and intersection could be perfected before a single stone was cut. But how do you transfer a delicate, life-size drawing onto heavy blocks of stone, or project its lines dozens of feet into the air to guide construction? The answer lay in templates. Craftsmen would fashion thin wooden or metal patterns, called templates or molds, directly from the lines on the tracing floor. A mason shaping a block for a rib vault would simply place the corresponding template onto the stone and trace its profile. This ensured that every single piece, carved by different hands, would fit together with perfect precision. It was a system of mass production centuries before the factory, guaranteeing geometric perfection through physical replication. yet the most versatile tool was perhaps the humble cord. A rope with knots tied at precise intervals became a portable geometry engine to create a perfect right angle for a foundation, essential for stability. Masons used the 3-4-5 triangle method. They would stretch a cord with 12 equal segments, pinning it to form a triangle with sides of 3, 4, and 5 units. The angle between the 3 and 4 unit sides is a perfect right angle every time. For the intricate pentagonal symmetry of a rose window, symbolizing divine beauty, they could use another cord trick to inscribe a perfect pentagon within a circle, all without a single written calculation. This was not magic but applied knowledge, guild secrets passed from master to apprentice. It was empirical mathematics where the truth of a theorem was proven by the stability of the wall it produced. These tools demystify the entire process. The golden ratio was not a number they calculated, it was a shape they constructed with a compass. The harmony of the spheres was a proportion they measured out with a knotted line. In their hands, abstract ideals became tactile, physical commands. The soaring cathedral was, in a very real sense, the tracing floor drawing magnified into the sky, its every line faithful to that original geometric prayer. This practical brilliance raises a final, haunting question. If their methods were so effective, so deeply rooted in observed truth, did these builders perhaps understand something about our world that our own focus on pure calculation has caused us to forget? Chartres Cathedral stands as a geometric manifesto, a perfect fusion of faith and mathematics carved in limestone and light. To walk through its west facade is to step into a living diagram. The central portal, the grand entrance, is framed by a precise series of interlocking golden rectangles. The height of the arch relates to its width, and that width to the spacing of the flanking towers, all whispering the divine proportion of phi. This isn't mere decoration. It is the architectural equivalent of a harmonic chord played before you even enter, setting the entire structure's mathematical key. Once inside, the geometry continues underfoot. The great labyrinth laid into the floor, a winding path for contemplative walking, is a masterpiece of precision. Its 11 concentric circuits are arranged with such exactitude that the entire pattern can be generated from a simple grid of circles and squares, a meditative puzzle built from pure compass work. But the true revelation is in the nave's soaring cross-section. Look up. The relationship between the width of the aisle, the height of the arcade, and the spring of the vault often resolves to simple ratios like 3:4 or 2:3, the very intervals of the musical harmony of the spheres. The space doesn't just surround you, it resonates around you, a silent symphony in stone. This cohesive perfection stems from a breathtakingly simple starting point. Modern analyses suggest the cathedral's entire ground plan can be generated from a single square. By swinging the square's diagonal to create a root 2 rectangle, then repeating the process, the master masons derived the dimensions of the choir, the transepts, and the nave. Every chapel, every bay, is a geometric offspring of that original, perfect shape. This means every part of Chartres, from the grandest tower to the smallest window tracery, speaks the same mathematical language. It is a single, unified organism grown from a seed of sacred geometry. Chartres wasn't simply built to be large or impressive. It was calculated to be a microcosm, a small-scale model of a divinely ordered universe. To stand within it is to stand inside a perfected world where number, shape, and spirit are one. This profound ambition was not unique to Chartres, however. Across Europe, another order of builders was applying the same principles, not to reach for the heavens, but to harness the power of earth and water. The stone and geometry of Chartres were not silent. They were preaching. For the medieval mind, every number held a divine echo, a layer of meaning that transformed a building from a shelter into a theological text written in 3 dimensions. This was the symbolic dimension of their hidden mathematics, where calculation and catechism became one. The most profound of these numbers was 3, the number of the Holy Trinity. This was not a subtle reference but a foundational architectural command. You see it in the tripartite division of the classic Gothic floor plan: nave, choir, and sanctuary, a progression mirroring the journey toward the divine. You pass through triple portals on the west facade, a physical enactment of entering through the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Above, triangular gables and trefoil arches in stone tracery repeat the motif endlessly, embedding the concept of 3 in 1 into the very fabric of visual experience. For a populace that could not read Latin scripture, walking through this space was a visceral lesson in the central mystery of their faith. But the builder's education, the framework of their intellect, was also built into the stone. This was the quadrivium, the 4 advanced liberal arts of arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, considered the essential path to understanding divine order. The perfect square of the monastic cloister was its quiet monument. Here, monks would walk and contemplate, surrounded by a shape that symbolized the 4 cardinal directions, the 4 seasons, and these 4 mathematical disciplines that revealed the cosmos. A church itself was almost always oriented with its altar to the east, facing the rising sun, a literal alignment with the cosmos that tied the building to the quadrivium's study of astronomy. The very act of building, from the arithmetic of proportions to the geometry of plans and the musical harmony of spaces, was a lived demonstration of the quadrivium. And then there is the number 7, representing the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit: wisdom, understanding, counsel, fortitude, knowledge, piety, and fear of the Lord. This sacred number might materialize in a 7-sided chapel, a heptagon, a shape far more complex than a simple square or hexagon, demanding sophisticated geometric skill to construct. Or it could be found overhead in a 7-part rib vault, where the intricate stone web branching from a central column created a canopy of symbolic meaning. This symbolic numerology reveals the ultimate purpose of the hidden mathematics. It was a language. In an age before widespread literacy, the cathedral served as a vast, immersive book. Its numbers, shapes, and proportions were a code that conveyed complex spiritual concepts directly to the senses. A villager might not understand a theological treatise on the Trinity, but by walking from a triple portal into a nave whose vaults echoed musical fifths, they experienced its harmony. They felt the order. The mathematics provided the invisible structure, but the symbolism gave that structure a soul, turning engineering into a form of mass communication with the divine. This deep fusion of number and meaning raises a compelling modern question. Can we still hear that sermon in the stone, or has our world become too noisy? Yet the same geometric language that built soaring cathedrals could also speak in a profound and powerful whisper. Far from the bustling towns, in the quiet valleys of Burgundy, stands the Abbey of Fontenay. Founded in the year 1118 by Bernard of Clairvaux, this Cistercian monastery presents a startling contrast to the complex splendor of Chartres. Its church is a study in radical austerity, stripped of stained glass, elaborate sculpture, and towering spires. But do not mistake this simplicity for a lack of sophistication. Here, the hidden mathematics was not abandoned, it was purified. For Bernard and his monks, ornate decoration was a dangerous distraction, a veil between the soul and God. But perfect geometry, they believed, was a direct reflection of divine order, a clear window into spiritual truth. Their architecture became an ascetic practice, a physical environment engineered to induce pure contemplation. The entire plan of the Abbey Church is a masterclass in modular precision. It is constructed from a series of perfect squares. The crossing, where the nave meets the transept, forms a central square. Each bay of the nave is another square of exactly the same dimensions. This creates a rhythmic, repeating unit of space that you can feel as you walk its length, a steady, meditative pulse in stone. The ratio that governs the elevation, the relationship between the width of the nave and the height of its vault, is not the complex golden ratio, but the clear, rational root 2, 1 to the square root of 2. This proportion, derived simply from the diagonal of a square, creates a space that feels simultaneously grounded and uplifted, solid yet subtly expansive. Without colorful windows or carved figures to look at, your attention has nowhere to go but the space itself. You become acutely aware of the play of light on bare stone, of the way sound echoes in the pure volume, and of the serene, undeniable logic of the proportions surrounding you. The architecture does not dazzle the senses, it quiets them, using mathematical harmony to frame an emptiness meant to be filled with prayer. This is the hidden mathematics serving a completely different theology. At Chartres, geometry aimed to overwhelm you with a vision of heaven's glorious complexity. At Fontenay, geometry aims to clear away everything until only heaven's perfect, simple order remains. Both approaches, however, rely on the same foundational belief that certain shapes and numbers carry an intrinsic spiritual power. The Cistercians proved that this design philosophy was not a style, but a fundamental tool, as adaptable to minimalist devotion as it was to maximalist celebration. Their stark, beautiful spaces force a modern question upon us. In our own world of constant visual noise, what might we hear in such calculated silence? The serene geometry of Fontenay solved a spiritual equation, but the soaring ambition of the great cathedrals presented a brutal physical one. How do you make stone, a material that loves to crush under its own weight, float? The answer was not found in thicker walls, but in a sharper angle. The Gothic arch was a geometric revolution. Compare it to the heavy, rounded Romanesque arch that came before. That semicircle pushes its weight outward and downward with almost equal force, demanding massive, fortress-like walls to contain the thrust. But the pointed Gothic arch is a different creature entirely. Its geometry is more dynamic. By rising to a point, it channels a greater proportion of its load vertically, straight down into the supporting piers. This simple change in shape, a shift from a constant curve to two intersecting arcs, transformed the physics of the building. It allowed walls to become taller and, critically, thinner. Windows could grow larger, filling the space with the very light that the Romanesque churches had to forego for stability. The pointed arch was the first masterstroke, a geometric key that unlocked the vertical dimension. But the arch alone could not create the vast, cavernous spaces of a cathedral nave. To span such a wide area with a stone ceiling, the builders needed a skeleton. This was the genius of the rib vault. Imagine two simple barrel vaults like stone tunnels intersecting at a right angle. The lines where they cross form graceful, arched ribs of stone. The medieval masons took this intersecting geometry and made it the primary structure. They would first build these slender ribs, crafting them from precisely cut stones. These ribs formed a permanent, lightweight framework high in the air. Once the ribs were in place, the spaces between them, called webs, could be filled with thinner, lighter stone panels. The ribs did all the heavy work. They acted as a permanent stone scaffolding, catching the weight of the ceiling and funneling it with absolute precision down along their curved lengths to specific points at their ends. This was applied mathematics of the highest order. The complex curves of each rib were not arbitrary. They were calculated trajectories, directing tremendous forces along predetermined paths to the tops of the slender piers below. Every ounce of stress was accounted for, guided by geometry to where it could be managed. This system turned the entire ceiling into a map of force, a visible diagram of how the building stood up. The rib vault meant the ceiling's weight was no longer a diffuse burden pressing down on a whole wall. It was a collection of focused loads delivered like messages to specific addresses. And waiting at those addresses, ready to catch those messages and redirect them, was the final piece of the geometric puzzle, an innovation that turned outward, thrust into breathtaking external sculpture. Those precise points of force demanded an answer, and the builders gave them one in stone, leaping into the open air. The Flying Buttress is the final, breathtaking equation in the Gothic structural system. It is the geometric solution to the outward thrust that the pointed arches and rib vaults could not eliminate, only redirect. Think of it as a stone arm, a graceful, arched bridge that springs from a solid pier on the ground and leans in to press against the high wall of the nave, exactly at the spot where the vault's ribs deliver their load. This external arm catches the thrust and channels it back down, away from the fragile walls and into the earth. But its genius is in its form. That soaring curve is not just for beauty. It is a perfectly calculated line of compression. The masons shaped it to follow the natural path that the force wanted to travel, turning a dangerous push into a stable, flowing arc of stone. This allowed the walls they were protecting to become what they had always dreamed of being, vast curtains of colored light. With the structural forces managed by this external skeleton of arches and piers, the wall was liberated. It could be pierced by enormous windows filled with stained glass, transforming the interior into a kaleidoscope of divine narrative and luminous color. The Flying Buttress completed the geometric revolution. It turned the building inside out, making its hidden skeleton of force into its most dramatic external feature. The cathedral was no longer just a container of space. It was a diagram of balance, a frozen moment of dynamic equilibrium, where every push was met with an equal and opposite counter-thrust, all orchestrated by geometry. This profound understanding of physical law, however, was always in service of a higher law. For the builders, the ultimate purpose of this stone mathematics was to align their creation with an even grander blueprint, one written in the movements of the sun and stars. This geometric quest was not confined to the forests and quarries of Europe. To truly understand the scope of this hidden mathematical language, we must glance briefly across the Mediterranean, where two other great medieval traditions were solving the same divine equation with breathtakingly different dialects. In the Islamic world, where religious practice discouraged figurative art in sacred spaces, architects and artisans developed a visual theology of pure form. Their solution was an infinitely complex language of geometry. Walk into a medieval mosque and look up at the muqarnas vaulting, a honeycomb of niches that seems to dissolve solid stone into crystalline light, or study the intricate patterns adorning a prayer niche. These are not random decorations. They are rigorous mathematical expressions generated from a compass and straightedge. Star patterns with 8, 10, or 12 points unfold into infinite tessellations, interlacing lines that never begin and never end. This was a deliberate artistic philosophy. The repeating, limitless patterns were a direct representation of the infinite nature of God, a visual proof of a universe without end, ordered by an eternal mathematical mind. It was sacred geometry made manifest as infinite weave, a cosmic principle expressed through precision and repetition. Meanwhile, under the great dome of Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, Byzantine engineers and theologians pursued harmony through a different proportional system. Their focus was the central dome, a symbol of the vault of heaven, and its relationship to the square floor plan below. This architecture of circles and squares created a profound spatial experience. The massive dome seems to float not through external buttresses, but through an ingenious hidden geometry of interlocking supports and a calculated distribution of weight. The space beneath it feels both centrally focused and mysteriously expansive, designed to evoke the very cosmology of the Christian universe, with the dome representing heaven descending to meet the earthly square. The proportions were meant to inspire awe and a sense of divine presence within a perfectly ordered cosmos. Seeing these three traditions together, Gothic, Islamic, and Byzantine, reveals a stunning truth. Across the medieval world, from France to Persia to Anatolia, architects were engaged in a parallel project. They were all using the most advanced mathematics of their age, not merely to build, but to encode. They were translating cosmic principles and deep theology into stone, tile, and mortar. Each culture, guided by its own spiritual convictions, developed a distinct dialect, from the soaring skeletal logic of the flying buttress to the infinite lattice of the geometric pattern to the heavenly synthesis of the dome on squares. Yet all were speaking the same fundamental language, a belief that the universe was built on number, and that to build in alignment with those numbers was to participate in something sacred. This shared pursuit forces a humbling question for our modern perspective. We live in an age of incredible computational power, where we can model stresses and shapes with digital precision. But have we lost the deeper conviction that drove these builders, the belief that mathematics itself could be a bridge to the transcendent? But how do we truly step inside that medieval mason's mind to see the world through his compass and square? For centuries, the knowledge of the master builders was a guarded oral tradition, passed from mentor to apprentice on the scaffolding itself, whispered and demonstrated but rarely written down. This makes one surviving object almost miraculous. It is a small, bound collection of parchment leaves from the 13th century, known as the Sketchbook of Villard de Honnecourt. Villard was a master mason from Picardy, a traveling craftsman who worked on sites across northern France. His book is not a formal treatise. It is a working notebook filled with over 250 drawings in ink, a messy, vibrant record of a curious and practical mind at work. And on these pages, the hidden mathematics steps out of the stone and onto the parchment, alive and in motion. Flipping through his sketches is like looking over the shoulder of a master at his tracing floor. Here is a meticulously drawn church tower, its proportions clearly marked. There, a complex rose window, its tracery broken down into a series of interlocking circles and arcs, a geometric recipe for beauty. He draws a lectern in the shape of an eagle, a water-powered sawmill, even a perpetual motion machine, revealing an intellect fascinated by both the sacred and the mechanical. But the most telling pages are those dedicated to pure geometry. One famous folio shows a series of figures demonstrating how to construct a perfect pentagon using only a compass and straightedge. This was not an academic exercise. The pentagon was the key to designing the pentagonal apse of a chapel or the five-lobed tracery of a window, shapes rich with symbolic meaning. Another page illustrates how to find the center of a given circle, a fundamental problem for laying out arches and vaults. Villard's sketchbook is a direct bridge between theory and practice. It proves that these sophisticated geometric operations were not abstract philosophy confined to monastery libraries. They were the daily, practical tools of the working mason, memorized and reproduced by hand. His drawings show the knowledge in transit, captured mid-thought. He notes, "Here begins the method of drawing as the art of geometry commands it," directly linking the act of design to the discipline of mathematics. This humble book shatters any notion that the cathedrals were built by intuition or guesswork. They were built by applied geometry, carried in the minds and hands of men like Villard, transmitted within the closed and secretive guilds of masons. The sketchbook is our single best piece of evidence that the hidden mathematics was a living, taught, and meticulously practiced craft. It was a body of knowledge so valuable it was worth recording, a visual testament to the fact that the master builder was, first and foremost, a master of geometric reasoning. Villard's notebook reveals the geometry of stone, but the medieval master's ultimate canvas was not rock, but radiance itself. The mathematics that structured the vaults and buttresses found its most sublime expression in the very absence of wall, in the vast windows that dissolved solidity into shimmering color. This was the final act of translation, where sacred geometry became a filter for light. To achieve this, the builders first had to invent a stone lace strong enough to hold the sky. This invention was bar tracery, the crowning achievement of the rayonnant or radiant style. Gone were the thick stone dividers of earlier windows. In their place, slender mullions of stone branched and curved like the veins of a leaf, creating intricate patterns of light and shadow. The design process was pure geometry in motion. Using a compass, the master mason would swing a series of circles, their arcs intersecting and tangent to one another. From these overlapping circles, he would derive the flowing, flame-like shapes of the tracery, the trefoils, quatrefoils, and complex star patterns. Every curve was a segment of a perfect circle, every intersection a calculated meeting point. This stone framework was not merely decorative, it was a lightweight, rigid skeleton, a geometric net cast to catch and divide the daylight, preparing it for its final transformation. Within each delicate stone compartment, the glaziers performed their own act of proportional alchemy. The stained glass panels were not random shards of color. They were carefully cut geometric shapes, assembled with lead cames into a precise mosaic. The size and proportion of each piece of glass, from the large central figures of saints to the tiny background leaves, were dictated by an underlying grid, often based on the same root rectangles that govern the building's plan. A vibrant red robe might be composed of rhombuses and triangles whose dimensions related to each other in simple ratios, ensuring the overall composition felt balanced even before a single brushstroke of detail was added. This meant the entire window, from its overarching stone tracery down to the smallest blue diamond in a border, was a unified geometric system. When the sun streamed through, it did not illuminate a random collage. It activated a calculated composition of colored light, projecting a harmony of form and hue directly onto the floor and the people within. The window became a cosmic instrument. Its stone geometry ordered the light, and its glass geometry colored it, transforming raw sunlight into a visible sermon. Scenes from scripture were literally framed by divine proportion, teaching that the stories themselves were part of a larger, perfectly ordered cosmos. To stand in that kaleidoscopic glow was to be immersed in the master builder's ultimate truth, that mathematics was not cold calculation, but the very language of illumination. Yet the same geometric principles that built houses of prayer were also drafted into the service of power and survival. When the sacred mathematics of the cathedral met the brutal necessities of warfare, it produced a different kind of masterpiece, one where every angle was calculated not for spiritual elevation but for sheer, unyielding defense. This is the story of the castle, where geometry became a language of life and death. The earliest fortifications were exercises in simple topography. The Motte and Bailey Castle was a statement of raw dominance, a tall, artificial earth mound crowned with a wooden tower, overlooking a protected courtyard below. Its strength came from height and slope, a brute force geometry. But as siege technology advanced, so too did the need for a more intelligent defense, one written in stone and trigonometry. The answer emerged as the concentric castle, a fortress built like a geometric puzzle of interlocking walls. At places like Beaumaris in Wales, built in the late 13th century, we see this new martial mathematics fully realized. The castle is not a single thick wall, but a series of them, one inside the other. Each curtain wall is a perfect geometric shape, often a square or polygon, carefully sized so that the outer wall is lower than the inner one. This was a deliberate calculation. Archers on the higher, inner wall could shoot over the heads of their own defenders on the outer wall, creating a devastating, layered field of fire. Every tower was positioned to cover a blind spot of its neighbor, ensuring that attacking any point meant facing enfilading arrows from at least two directions. The design transformed the entire fortress into a single, integrated weapon, where the placement of each stone was a variable in a deadly equation. This geometric thinking led to a fundamental evolution in form, the death of the square tower. For centuries, square or rectangular towers were standard, but their corners presented a critical weakness. Siege engines like trebuchets could batter them, and miners could dig at their right-angled foundations, causing collapse. The solution was a shape with no weak corners, a shape that deflected projectiles and offered no safe harbor for sappers, the round tower. But the round tower was just the beginning. Builders soon realized that a multi-sided polygonal tower offered the same ballistic benefits as a circle, but was far easier to construct with dressed stone. A 12-sided tower, for example, presented a continuously curving face to an attacker while being built from straight, manageable blocks. This was geometry in its most pragmatic form, a direct response to physics and threat. The most fearsome expression of this martial math was the gatehouse, the castle's most vulnerable point. Here, geometry was used to create a lethal maze. Approaches were angled, forcing attackers into narrow channels where they could be rained upon from murder holes above. Entrances were staggered, creating a series of choke points. Towers flanking the gate projected outward, allowing defenders to shoot directly down along the face of the gate itself, eliminating any dead ground. This created what military planners call overlapping fields of fire, a kill zone where every square foot was covered by multiple archers. Designing such a complex, three-dimensional trap required an advanced understanding of sight lines and angles, a grim trigonometry practiced by master masons who were, in effect, combat engineers. In the concentric castle, there was no decoration for its own sake. Every curve, every wall placement, every arrow slit's narrow angle was a product of calculation. The hidden mathematics here served a secular god, the god of survival. It was a geometry of fear and force, proving that the same principles that could lift a soul to heaven could also make a fortress nearly impregnable. This relentless optimization for defense, however, represents only one side of the medieval mind's application of order. If geometry could plan for death, could it also be used to plan for life, to design the ideal community? The same geometric principles that fortified a castle could also lay the foundation for an ideal society. The master builder's compass did not stop at the cathedral door or the castle wall. It stepped out into the streets, scaling up to design entire communities from scratch. This was the urban equation, an attempt to impose the harmony of sacred geometry onto the very map of daily life. Across war-torn regions of France and England in the 13th and 14th centuries, kings and lords established hundreds of new towns known as bastides. These were not organic villages that grew slowly over time. They were planned settlements conceived on parchment with ruler and compass before a single foundation trench was dug. Their layout was a statement of rational order. Many bastides were built on a strict grid plan, a series of perfectly rectangular blocks radiating from a central, open market square. This square was the geometric and social heart of the town, a space for commerce and community gathering, and at one end of this square, or sometimes facing it directly, stood the church. The placement was deliberate. The entire town, with its orderly streets and uniform plots for houses, was oriented around this sacred anchor. The grid itself was a geometric metaphor. It represented fairness and equality under the law, with each citizen receiving a standard-sized plot. More profoundly, it reflected the medieval belief in a cosmos structured by divine law and proportion. To walk the straight, intersecting streets of a bastide was to inhabit a man-made diagram of cosmic order, where civic life and spiritual life were physically integrated into a single, harmonious design. This vision of a holistic environment reached its most sophisticated expression in the cathedral close. This was the walled precinct surrounding a great cathedral, a miniature holy city within the larger town. Here, every structure had a purposeful relationship to the Mother Church, governed by an invisible mathematics of placement and proportion. The chapter house where the clergy met was often built as a polygonal annex, its geometry echoing the cathedral's own plan. The cloister, a square garden for meditation, provided a quiet geometric counterpoint to the vertical soar of the nave. The bishop's palace and the cathedral school were positioned not at random, but at distances and angles that created a balanced ensemble. Historians studying these sites note that the distances between key buildings often relate to one another in simple ratios, like 1:2 or 2:3, the same harmonic intervals found in the cathedral's music of the spheres. This was urban planning as a spiritual practice. The close was designed to be a complete world where the rhythms of prayer, study, governance, and contemplation all unfolded within a physical framework believed to mirror heavenly harmony. It shaped existence itself, guiding the daily movement of monks, scholars, and bishops through a landscape that was itself a lesson in divine order. This ambitious application of geometry to the whole fabric of life reveals the ultimate goal: to build not just a building, but an entire way of being in alignment with a mathematical cosmos. Yet, if this sacred language was so powerful and so pervasive, why did its fluent speakers, the master masons themselves, ultimately vanish from history? Amiens Cathedral is where the medieval mathematical dream became stone and sky. If Chartres was a perfect geometric manifesto, Amiens is its breathtakingly ambitious sequel, pushing every principle to its absolute limit in a single, staggering act of synthesis. Here, the hidden calculations are not just present, they are performing in perfect concert, creating a structure that feels less built than calculated into existence. The first thing you feel is the sheer, vertiginous lift. The nave vaults soar to a height of over 140 feet, a dimension achieved not by brute force, but by the flawless geometry of its skeletal system. The rib vaults here are a masterwork of directed force. Each slender stone rib is a precise trajectory, a calculated line that catches the ceiling's immense weight and funnels it with unerring accuracy down to the top of a slender column. And waiting there, outside the wall, is the flying buttress in its most confident and elegant form. These stone arms leap through the air with a graceful, muscular arc, their curves perfectly describing the path of the thrust they must cancel. They form an exoskeleton of breathtaking logic, a visible diagram of equilibrium that allows the interior walls to dissolve into the largest expanse of stained glass of its time. This is the Gothic structural system singing in its purest, most powerful key, a hymn of counterbalanced forces written in limestone. This vertical miracle rests on a plan of profound geometric intelligence. The layout of the eastern end, the chevet, is a masterpiece of rotational geometry. It was generated not from a single shape, but from a dynamic process. Master masons began with a square defining the choir. They then rotated that square 45 degrees, placing a new square diagonally over the first. By repeating this process of rotation and overlay, they derived the radiating points for the complex ring of chapels that surround the apse. This rotating square method created a plan of incredible sophistication, a series of interconnected spaces that flow seamlessly into one another, all born from the simple, repeated act of turning a fundamental shape. It is geometry in motion, frozen at the moment of its conception. The mathematical confidence extends to the very face it presents to the world. The west facade of Amiens is a densely coded geometric puzzle. Analysis reveals that its entire sculptural program, the placement of statues, the division of portals, and the rise of the towers, can be overlaid with a precise network of interlocking circles and pentagons. The pentagon, a shape deeply associated with the golden ratio and symbolic perfection, provided the hidden scaffolding for the facade's harmonious proportions. This means the stories told in stone, the rows of saints and kings, are framed within an invisible matrix of divine proportion. The builders were not just carving figures, they were placing them within a cosmic diagram. Amiens represents the apex of the medieval builder's art because it demonstrates a fearless command of multiple, overlapping geometric systems all at once. The rotating squares govern the plan. The harmonic ratios of the quadrivium govern the vertical proportions. The skeletal logic of ribs and buttresses governs the physics. And the sacred polygons govern the facade's symbolism. They held all these complex variables in their minds simultaneously, weaving them into a single, coherent whole of overwhelming height, light, and spatial complexity. Amiens is the definitive statement that humanity could not only comprehend the divine mathematical laws of the universe, but could use them to build a new heaven here on earth. It stands as a permanent testament to a moment when faith and reason, prayer and calculation were seen as two sides of the same perfect coin. Yet the master mason's secret language did not disappear with the last stone of Amiens. It simply found new translators, men who looked not only to the heavens but also into the mirror. The Renaissance is often celebrated as a clean break from the medieval world, a triumphant return to classical purity. But in the quiet libraries and drafting tables of 15th century Italy, a crucial evolution was underway. Thinkers like Leon Battista Alberti and the unparalleled Leonardo da Vinci were not rejecting the past. They were becoming its most sophisticated heirs, repurposing its sacred mathematics for a new, human-centered age. While they championed the rediscovery of ancient Roman texts, most importantly the architectural treatise of Vitruvius, they were also standing on the shoulders of the anonymous cathedral builders. Their genius was to fuse the medieval tradition of cosmic geometry with a revived classical focus on the human form as the ultimate measure of all things. This fusion produced perhaps the most iconic image in the history of ideas, Leonardo's Vitruvian Man. That famous drawing is far more than a study of anatomy. It is a geometric theorem in flesh and blood. Here, a man stands simultaneously within a perfect circle and a perfect square, his limbs touching the boundaries of both shapes. This was Leonardo's visualization of Vitruvius's ancient claim that the ideal human proportions could be inscribed within these perfect geometric forms. But the knowledge required to execute such a drawing, to relate the span of the arms to the height of the body with such precision, did not spring from ancient Rome alone. It flowed directly from the centuries of practical geometry practiced by the Masons' guilds, from their mastery of constructing circles, squares, and complex polygons. Leonardo was applying the medieval toolkit to a new subject, the human body itself, declaring that the same mathematics that ordered the cosmos was written into our very bones. This shift from divine to human proportion was monumental. The Renaissance architects systematized this inherited, secret knowledge. Alberti, in his own architectural treatise, did something the medieval masters rarely did. He published it. He laid out rules of proportion and perspective for all to read, transforming guarded guild techniques into a public, intellectual discipline. The old sacred geometry, once used to calculate the rise of a vault pointing to God, was now being used to design the perfectly proportioned palazzo for a merchant prince, or to paint a scene with mathematically precise perspective that drew the viewer into the picture itself. The circle and square were no longer just symbols of heaven and earth. In Leonardo's drawing, they became the measure of man, the proof that humanity itself was a microcosm of the mathematical universe. This was the great bridge. The Renaissance did not abandon the hidden mathematics of the Middle Ages. It translated it from the language of theology into the language of humanism and emerging science, carrying forward the profound belief that to understand number and form was to understand the deepest truths of existence. For centuries, the precise geometry of the cathedrals was a matter of scholarly debate, a beautiful theory based on careful observation and historical texts. Today, we no longer have to wonder, we can measure. A quiet revolution in architectural archaeology is unfolding, not with picks and brushes, but with lasers and algorithms. Researchers now employ tools like laser scanning and photogrammetry, which use thousands of photographic images to build a model. They bathe these ancient structures in grids of light, capturing every curve, every imperfection, every stone with sub-millimeter precision. This data creates a flawless digital twin, a three-dimensional map of the building far more accurate than any hand-drawn plan. Within this virtual space, historians and mathematicians can perform analyses that were once impossible. They can take 10,000 measurements in minutes, comparing the width of every bay to the height of every arch, searching for the hidden patterns, and what they find is astonishing. Statistical analysis consistently reveals that key proportions across entire structures align with the golden ratio or the √2 rectangle, with a margin of error often below 1%. This is not a coincidence found in one or two places. It is a repeating, deliberate signature across the entire design. This digital proof transforms our understanding. It moves the master mason's work from the realm of artistic intuition into the domain of applied mathematical science. We can now reverse engineer their process with stunning clarity. By applying geometric rules to the digital model, researchers can often reconstruct the exact sequence of compass strokes and chord measurements that generated the floor plan, watching the cathedral grow on screen from a single square through a series of logical, repeatable steps. This technology silences the skeptics who argued the builders worked by rule of thumb. The numbers are too consistent, too pervasive. They reveal a meticulous, shared intent, a codified knowledge practiced with unwavering discipline. This digital archaeology does not diminish the cathedral's mystery, it deepens our awe. It confirms that the harmony we feel in those spaces is not a vague emotional response, but a physiological reaction to mathematically perfected form. We are, in a very real sense, feeling the proof, but the digital proof of this intricate geometry invites a necessary and skeptical question. Could we be seeing patterns where none were intended? After all, a builder using a compass and a standard unit of measurement will naturally produce certain ratios. Is the sacred geometry of the cathedrals a profound historical truth, or are we, centuries later, simply connecting dots in a beautiful but imaginary constellation? This debate has long divided scholars into two distinct camps. On one side are the functionalists, who argue that the primary driver was practical engineering. The pointed arch directed weight more efficiently, the rib vault allowed for lighter infill, the flying buttress countered thrust. In this view, the beautiful proportions were a happy byproduct of solving structural problems, not the result of applying a mystical mathematical canon. A master mason might choose a √2 rectangle not for its cosmic symbolism, but because it was the simplest and most stable way to derive a larger bay from a smaller square module. The harmony we feel, they suggest, is the innate satisfaction of witnessing a problem solved with elegant efficiency. On the other side stand the symbolists, who point to the overwhelming evidence of intention. They argue that the recurrence of specific, complex systems, like the rotating squares at Amiens or the pentagonal grids on facades across multiple sites built by different guilds over centuries, cannot be accidental. These were not the only possible solutions. They were chosen solutions, consistently aligned with the era's documented philosophical belief in a mathematical cosmos. The symbolic meaning of numbers like 3 or 7 was explicitly taught, making it inconceivable that builders would use them in key structural roles without awareness. For the symbolists, the cathedrals are deliberate theological texts, and the geometry is their syntax. the most compelling resolution likely lies not in choosing one side over the other, but in recognizing that the medieval master mason would have found the distinction meaningless. In his unified worldview, the spiritual and the structural were two expressions of the same divine law. A vault designed with harmonic ratios was simultaneously the most stable structure and the most eloquent prayer. The root 2 rectangle was both the most practical modular tool and a reflection of the fundamental relationship between the side and diagonal of a square, a relationship that echoed the tension between the earthly and the divine. For him, beauty was not an added decoration, but the visible signature of perfect function within a cosmic order. The geometry served both profound symbolic purposes and critical practical functions because, in his understanding of reality, those two things were ultimately the same. To ask whether the mathematics was for God or for gravity is to impose a modern dichotomy on a pre-modern mind that saw the universe as an inseparable whole. This synthesis is the true enduring mystery, not whether the patterns are real, but how a society could so completely integrate faith, art, and science into a single, soaring act of creation. This profound integration points toward something our modern world has largely misplaced. For the master mason, mathematics was not merely a tool for calculation. It was a living metaphor, a direct language for describing the deepest nature of reality. When he ensured his arch followed the golden ratio, he wasn't just solving an engineering problem. He was aligning his work with what he saw as the very structure of truth, a stable, eternal order that underpinned a cosmos created by a rational mind. A correctly proportioned building did not just stand up against the wind. It participated in a cosmic reality, becoming a physical node in a web of divine harmony. This was a worldview where beauty, stability, and truth were understood as different facets of the same geometric perfection. The strength of the vault was inseparable from its spiritual resonance because both flowed from obedience to the same universal laws. Our contemporary view of mathematics is often starkly different. We tend to see it as a purely utilitarian discipline, a cold, abstract language of science, finance, and engineering. It's a tool for building bridges, sending rockets to Mars, or modeling economies. We've largely divorced it from questions of ultimate meaning or beauty. Math is something we use, not something we inhabit. This shift is not a simple case of progress. In gaining incredible computational power, we may have lost a vital dimension of understanding. The medieval perspective invites us to see these stone wonders not as the products of cold number crunching, but as warm, lived expressions of a universe believed to be fundamentally rational, beautiful, and intelligible. The cathedral was a collective act of trust in an ordered cosmos. Every harmonic ratio in its nave was a declaration that the universe made sense, that human reason could glimpse the mind of its creator, and that our own lives could be built upon that same foundation of meaningful order. In an age often characterized by fragmentation, where knowledge is siloed and purpose can feel elusive, this ancient integration offers a powerful reminder. It speaks to a timeless human desire to find coherence, to see our creations not as isolated objects, but as conversations with a larger, patterned existence. The silent mathematics in the stone is ultimately a testament to the hope that our world, and our place within it, is not random noise, but a composition waiting to be heard. This ancient synthesis of number and form is not a relic. It is a living conversation, one that modern architects and designers are re-engaging with in surprising and vital ways. The medieval master's belief that the best designs are found in nature's own patterns has found a powerful new expression in the field of biomimicry. Today, engineers study the spiral of a nautilus shell, a classic Fibonacci sequence, not for its symbolic beauty, but for its structural genius. That logarithmic spiral represents an incredibly efficient way to grow while maintaining strength. This principle now informs the design of everything from earthquake-resistant skyscrapers that sway like trees in the wind, to the aerodynamic curves of high-speed trains modeled on the beak of a kingfisher. When a modern architect uses the golden ratio to proportion a building's facade, they are often tapping into the same deep source of efficiency and resilience that the medieval builders saw as divine. It turns out that nature's mathematics, revered as sacred geometry, is also supremely practical engineering. This reconnection extends inward to the very experience of being in a space. A growing body of research in architectural psychology suggests that our minds and bodies respond measurably to proportion. Studies indicate that rooms with dimensions based on simple harmonic ratios, like those musical intervals from the quadrivium, can subtly lower heart rates and reduce feelings of anxiety. Spaces that feel balanced and serene are not just an aesthetic preference, they have a biochemical foundation. The medieval cathedral, intentionally designed to evoke awe and peace, was quietly pioneering a science of well-being centuries before we had the instruments to measure it. This human-centric focus is driving a revolution in sustainable design as well. The contemporary quest to create buildings that heat and cool themselves passively, using form and orientation instead of massive energy inputs, directly echoes the Gothic builders' challenge. They had to make stone float without modern machinery. We have to make buildings comfortable without fossil fuels. The solution in both cases is intelligent geometry. The sweeping, self-shading curves of a modern sustainable museum, or the strategic placement of windows to maximize passive solar gain, are calculations in form, a direct descendant of the master mason's work on his tracing floor. The legacy of this hidden mathematics, therefore, is profoundly practical. It offers a timeless lesson in integration. The medieval builder did not see proportion, structure, and human experience as separate concerns. They were a single, interlocking system. A well-proportioned space was a stable space, and a stable space was a nourishing space. In our rush to optimize for efficiency alone, we have often built environments that are technically sound but psychologically barren. The ancient model invites us back to a more holistic vision, to design not just for shelter or spectacle, but for the human spirit. It asks us to remember that the most advanced calculation is ultimately worthless if it forgets the people who must live within its lines. The master mason's compass traced more than circles on stone. It mapped an entire hidden society. To truly grasp how this mathematical language could spread across a continent, we must step inside the closed world of the Mason's Lodge. This was not just a workshop, it was a living university, a fraternity, and the beating heart of a revolutionary craft. Within its walls, knowledge flowed in a strict, unbroken chain. A young boy, perhaps 12 or 13, would enter as an apprentice. His first years were spent in humble service, mixing mortar, fetching tools, and learning by watching. But his real education was in handling the sacred instruments, the square and compass. He learned not just to measure, but to see the geometry in a rough block of stone, to understand how the invisible lines within it could be released by the mason's hammer and chisel. This was a physical, tactile mathematics, learned through the ache in the shoulders and the feel of a true edge. After 7 long years, if he proved skilled and loyal, he might become a journeyman. Now he could travel, carrying a letter of recommendation from his master, seeking work on the great projects that dotted the landscape. This itinerant life was the secret network of the Gothic Revolution. A journeyman from Chartres might find himself working on the rising walls of Cologne, bringing with him the precise geometric canon of his home lodge. Techniques for constructing a particular vault pattern or the preferred proportions for a pier base traveled not in books, but in the minds and skilled hands of these men. They were the living vectors of a continental style, a human internet transmitting coded knowledge from one building site to the next. At the pinnacle stood the master mason. He was architect, engineer, foreman, and theologian all in one. He held the lodge's greatest treasure, the secret design plans. These were not detailed blueprints as we know them, but collections of geometric diagrams, templates, and proportional rules often kept on closely guarded tracing floors or in personal sketchbooks like Villard's. This knowledge was his intellectual property, the source of his prestige and livelihood. It was protected fiercely by the Guild, the powerful trade union that regulated the craft. The Guild controlled quality, set wages, and ensured that the mysteries of the craft were passed only to those who had earned the right through long apprenticeship and sworn oaths. This socio-economic structure explains the miracle of consistency. There was no central architectural school, no king issuing standard plans. Instead, a decentralized fraternity of practitioners, united by a shared craft and a shared cosmology, implemented a remarkably consistent mathematical language. A master in England and a master in France, though they might never meet, were trained in the same geometric principles, used the same tools, and answered to the same cosmic ideal. Their shared belief that they were building divine order created a powerful, invisible standard. The lodge was where the abstract met the earthly. It was where the harmony of the spheres was translated into a weekly wage, where sacred geometry determined the cut of a stone and the solidarity of the men who shaped it. This unique blend of spiritual purpose and rigorous tradecraft produced something far greater than the sum of its parts, a legacy written not by a single genius, but by a silent, mobile army of geometers in leather aprons. You can hold that mason's compass in your own hand right now. The geometry that built the rose window is not locked in the past. It is a living process waiting for you to perform it. Let's reconstruct a pentagon, the very shape that encodes the golden ratio and framed so much sacred art. You need only two tools, a compass for drawing circles and a straight edge for drawing lines, nothing more. If you have a pencil, a piece of paper, a ruler, and something to trace a circle, you are ready. This is the same sequence of steps a master would have followed on his tracing floor. First, draw a circle. Let this be your universe, a perfect boundary with no beginning and no end. Now, find its heart. Use your straight edge to draw a line across the circle, any chord. Find the midpoint of that line and construct a perpendicular line through that point, extending it to cut the circle in two places. That line is a diameter. Find the midpoint of that diameter, and you have found the exact center of your circle. Mark it clearly. This act of finding the center from within the circle itself is the first quiet miracle of geometry, a problem solved daily on the medieval building site. From that center, draw two perpendicular diameters crossing at 90 degrees, dividing your circle into 4 equal quarters. Now, focus on one of these radial lines from the center to the circle's edge. Find the midpoint of that radius, place the point of your compass on this midpoint, and open the compass to reach the center point. Swing a small arc through the circle's interior. This arc is a key. It unlocks the next measurement. Without changing your compass width, place the point on the spot where your first diameter meets the circle's edge. Swing a new arc that crosses the circle's circumference. Mark that intersection point. This is your first pentagon vertex. From here, the pattern unfolds. Place your compass point on this new vertex, and with the same width, swing another arc to mark the next point on the circle. Continue this process, stepping around the circumference with your compass set to that magical, constant width. 5 steps will bring you back to your beginning. Connect these 5 points with your straight edge, and there it is, a perfect pentagon inscribed within the circle. You have not just drawn a shape, you have performed an algorithm centuries old. You used no numbers, no calculations, only the logic of circles and arcs. The satisfaction you feel, that moment of seeing perfect symmetry emerge from your own hand, is the same quiet triumph a master mason felt when his template matched the lines on the floor. This simple exercise reveals the profound truth. The advanced mathematics was not about complex equations scribbled in margins. It was about this, the physical act of construction, the revelation of hidden order through movement and line. You have just spoken a few words of their silent language, and this geometric key, the Pentagon, opens a door to an even deeper mystery, one that connects the petals of a rose to the arms of a galaxy, a pattern so universal it seems woven into the fabric of reality itself. That pentagon you just drew forces a question far deeper than geometry. We have followed the compass lines, decoded the harmonic ratios, and stood in awe of the resulting spaces. But now we must ask, what were these builders truly doing? Were they uncovering universal truths, or were they writing their own beliefs into the very stones? This is the philosophical heart of our journey, a puzzle about the nature of reality itself. On one side stands a view as old as Plato. He taught that beyond our messy, imperfect world lies a realm of perfect, eternal forms. The circle you draw is flawed, but the idea of a circle is perfect and timeless. For the medieval mind steeped in this thought, mathematical truths like the golden ratio or the harmonic intervals were glimpses into this divine blueprint. They were not inventing beauty, they were discovering it, aligning their cathedrals with a pre-existing cosmic order written into the fabric of creation. In this view, the serenity we feel in Chartres is not a cultural accident. It is a resonance with a deeper, objective truth about proportion and harmony that exists independently of human mind. The builders were archaeologists of a sort, uncovering the eternal mathematics of a rational universe. Yet a modern perspective offers a starkly different interpretation. From this vantage point, all knowledge, including mathematics, is a human construction. We impose patterns on chaos to make the world comprehensible. The golden ratio is not a universal law of beauty, but a cultural preference, a symbolic system that gained power because a society agreed it was meaningful. In this view, the master masons were not discovering truth, they were creating meaning. They projected their theological beliefs onto geometry, and then built a world that reinforced those very beliefs. The cathedral's harmony proves nothing about the universe, only about the medieval imagination and its powerful desire for order. So, which is it? Were they mapping heaven or building a mirror? Perhaps the most profound answer lies not in choosing a side, but in observing what their work achieved. In the disciplined act of building according to these principles, they created a new reality. A vault designed with harmonic ratios did not just symbolize stability, it achieved it. A space proportioned by the golden ratio did not just represent beauty, it reliably evoked a sense of awe in those who entered. Their applied faith produced structures that functioned magnificently, as if the mathematical laws were universal. In doing so, they blurred the line between discovery and creation in a way that defines so much of human genius. We see this pattern throughout history. Scientists formulate a law of physics, and engineers then use it to build a bridge. The law describes a truth about the world, but the bridge is a new creation that makes that truth tangible, useful, and beautiful. The medieval builders were doing something remarkably similar, but starting from a foundation of faith rather than empiricism. They believed in a mathematical cosmos, and by building as if it were true, they made that cosmos visible, touchable, and inhabitable. Their legacy, therefore, is not a settled philosophical argument, but a lasting demonstration of how conviction, when married to skill, can shape reality itself. They built a world that argued for order, and in its enduring stability and beauty, that argument continues to persuade us centuries later. This synthesis of belief and stone prepares us for a final, unifying thought, one that connects the mason's tracing floor to our own place in a vast, patterned cosmos. These silent cathedrals are libraries of a forgotten science. They hold within their stones a profound argument about the nature of our world, one built not with words, but with compass lines and the weight of limestone. As we step back now from the intricate tracery and soaring vaults, we must see these medieval masterpieces anew. They are not relics of a superstitious past, but monumental achievements of intellectual rigor and spiritual aspiration. The advanced mathematics hidden in their proportions was the silent engine of their beauty and endurance, a fusion of faith and reason that has few parallels in human history. This was not a secret cult, but a public, lived philosophy, written in a language of geometry that anyone could feel, even if they could not name the numbers. From the harmonic ratios echoing musical consonants to the golden ratio whispering of growth and life, these buildings stand as enduring proof of humanity's deep, persistent quest to find and embody order in the universe. They represent a moment when to seek truth, to create beauty, and to honor the divine were all understood as facets of the same disciplined act. The master mason's compass was a tool of worship, and his tracing floor was an altar to a rational cosmos. This legacy invites us to look beyond the surface of the ancient and the familiar. The greatest truths are often encoded not in the grand statements, but in the quiet spaces between things, in the proportions of a window, the curve of an arch, the way light falls in a perfectly calculated bay. It asks us to consider what silent languages we are building with today, and what harmonies we are choosing to encode in our own world. If this journey into the hidden language of stone resonated with you, please subscribe for more deep dives into history's quietest revolutions. And share in the comments below which other architectural mystery you would like us to decode next.